In the 1950s and 1960s, Chrysler developed the car of the future, which unfortunately would end up being relegated not only to the past, but also, much like the GMV1, to the scrapyard, with all of these beautiful bronze-coloured masterpieces going to the landfill. This is the Chrysler Turbine Car, which is not only a legend of the jet age, but also would allow Chrysler to build the central power unit for America's premier battle tank of the 80s and 90s, but would also give us a glimpse into the future of self-driving and be a dream purchase of the jawline of television himself, Jay Leno. This is the entire history of the Chrysler Turbine Car. I'm Jason Hassett, and welcome to Car Nerd. This is Storytime. Should have mentioned that. Hello everybody and welcome back to Car Nerd, another Storytime episode where today we're going to be diving into the Chrysler Turbine Car and the entire history of the Turbine Car along with the aftermath. I love this thing and I know it's one of Jay Leno's favorites as well. I love Jay Leno's garage, or as they call it in America, Jay Leno's garage. But yeah, this car is just incredible. I've never really delved into the full background and history of it, so I thought in this episode it'd be fun to dive into the origins and so on. If you're new to the channel, this new format is simple. I get some research done for me from the interweb, which is violently unreliable, and we go through this together, which means there will probably be something in here which is incorrect, something I've missed, whatever. And if I have, please head down into the comments and let us all know so we can all learn about the passion of cars, which we're clearly all interested in, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And while you're down there, do not forget to like, comment and subscribe, because that helps me get some cold hard cash. Let's jump into it. In the late 1930s, Chrysler engineer George J. Huebner Jr. begins experimenting with gas turbine engines for military aviation. By the 1940s, Huebner envisions adapting turbine powers to automobiles. He was basically intrigued by the turbofan simplicity and the multiple fuel availability potential. Basically, instead of just having to use petrol, electricity, whatever, you could basically use anything flammable, was his thinking. This was an era dazzled by jet engines. Victory in World War II and the dawn of the jet age had engineers dreaming of turbo-powered everything, including family cars. This was the era that Fallout kind of builds itself in, or, fames itself around. The time when the future seemed like it would be jet engines and the world would be powered by nuclear energy. Could have looked really cool. Unfortunately, people got scared of nuclear and jets kill people, so I guess we just moved on, but an intriguing time. After World War II, Huebner assembled a small, very secretive team, including Bud Mann and Sam Williams at Chrysler, dedicated to automotive turbine research. They recognized turbines have 80% fewer moving parts than piston engines and could run on a variety of fuels from kerosene to diesel, a tantalizing prospect for a future of hassle-free, fuel-flexible cars. And look, at the end of the day, like I've already said, the world was already being fueled by this dream of the jet age. This was the time when cars were starting to get those tail fins inspired by jet-propelled military aircraft. And then you had pop culture dedicated to this space age that was coming up, the Jetsons versus the Flintstones. And President Kennedy's 1962 moonshot also helped promote this idea of this kind of techno-optimism. In this climate of futurist wonder, a jet power car seemed not only plausible, but inevitable. Chrysler wasn't alone in this, though, and there was an unlikely candidate working on their own jet car at the same time. In 1950, Britain's Rover company, yeah, you heard it correctly, unveiled Jet 1, the world's first gas turbine car, a little two-seater with its turbine mounted behind the seats. In tests, it reached 88 miles per hour at 50,000 RPM and went back to the future. I made up that last part, but you get the reference. If you don't, where have you been living? If you haven't laughed, that's fine, neither did I. It could run on petrol, paraffin, or diesel. Unfortunately, it guzzled fuel too quickly to be practical. This proved turbine cars were technically feasible, even if experimental. In the US, General Motors showcased a wild turbine-powered dream car in its Motorama shows. The Firebird 1 in 1953 was a single-seat jet-like concept, but it was the Firebird 2 in 1956 that truly pushed futurism. GM's 1956 Firebird 2 concept car, called a laboratory on wheels, even envisioned self-driving technology, which we'd covered on this channel in another video. It featured a regenerative, easy for me to say, it featured a regenerative gas turbine engine and an electronic brain to communicate with a safety auto-way highway system for hands-free control. This 4-passenger titanium-bodied wonder illustrated the era's optimistic belief that the cars of tomorrow would be jet-powered and guided by electronic highways. GM's legendary designer Harley Earl oversaw the Firebird concepts, calling Firebird 2 the first American gas turbine car designed for family use on the highways of the future. It had innovations like all-wheel independent suspension, disc brakes, and even individual air conditioning for each passenger. The broader industry context shows Chrysler's turbine program was part of a mid-century push across automakers to marry jet-age power with futuristic features, even if, for now, it was all in the realm of prototypes and PR showcases. On June 16, 1954, Chrysler had publicly debuted its first turbine-powered car, a modified 1954 Plymouth Belvedere sedan. Outwardly stock, it had a fiery heart, and when it started, reporters heard a high-pitched whine followed by a whooshing roar, the sound of the jet age itself spooling up right in front of them. The Chrysler Turbine had 20% fewer parts and was 200 pounds lighter than an equivalent piston engine. The press was astonished at Huebner demonstrating the car at the Chelsea Proving Ground, proving a jet car could do everyday driving, cruising, idling, and even stop-go traffic, albeit with a unique whirlwind sound and a superheated exhaust. Chrysler's next prototype, a 1956 Plymouth, made headlines with a coast-to-coast drive. On March 23, 1956, Huebner himself drove the turbine car from New York to Los Angeles, 3,020 miles in 4 days, albeit trailed by a convoy of 14 mechanics and support vehicles with spare parts and fuel. But remarkably, the turbine car only needed 2 minor fixes along the way, and neither was engine-related. The jet whine turned heads across America, and the car smoothly conquered mountain passes and desert flats. This success led Chrysler to double its turbine research program, moving the team into a larger Detroit lab and accelerating development. By the late 1950s, Chrysler's turbine effort was in high gear. In 1957, the program produced numerous patents, fueled by new hires like metallurgist Amedee Roy and Italian engineer Giovanni Sovanuzzi, who had worked with Ghia previously. They improved turbine durability and solved heat issues by adding a regenerator, a heat exchanger to recycle exhaust heat, a breakthrough that made the engines more efficient. A second-generation turbine engine went into a 1959 Plymouth and achieved about 19.4 miles per gallon on a Detroit to New Jersey run. This was a leap from when the first generation's engine only achieved 13 miles to the gallon on the 1956 cross-country run, showing rapid improvement in fuel economy, and the pieces were falling into place. And I know 19 miles a gallon doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but back then it wasn't amazing for a normal petrol car, but it was pretty decent for a high-performance car of the future. Chrysler unveiled its third-generation turbine engine, dubbed the CR2A, on February 28th of 1961, the first time the car gave its turbine engine an official name. This new turbine was designed with mass production in mind, emphasizing a lower cost and easier manufacturing process. Huebner proudly claimed the CR2A would produce 140 horsepower, serving as its own torque converter, and cut acceleration lag from 9 seconds to just 1.5 seconds. It was also significantly lighter than the equivalent V8 engine, and in short, Chrysler's jet-age power plant had become leaner and more responsive, addressing critics who complained early turbine engines were sluggish. Between this and 1962, Chrysler produced a small fleet of these cars for testing. They installed turbines in a 1960 Dodge heavy-duty truck and even crafted a sleek concept car called the Chrysler Turboflight. More practically, in 1961, they fitted the CR2A engine into a Dodge Dart and a Plymouth Fury. In December of 1961, a turbine Dart drove from New York City to Los Angeles, and the Fury did Los Angeles to San Francisco in 1962 in January. Both long-distance journeys with minimal issues. When Huebner arrived in LA with the Dart, he spent hours giving thrill rides to journalists, letting reporters feel the eerily smooth acceleration and hear the jet-like hum firsthand. The press coverage was largely positive, marveling at how the turbine engine car felt right, even in city traffic. To build public excitement, Chrysler embarked on a brainstorming tour of its turbine prototypes. By February of 1962, the turbine cars had visited 90 cities across North America, Europe, and even Mexico, giving rides to nearly 14,000 people. Crowds lined up to experience the futuristic car that whistled like a jet and ran on anything flammable. The enthusiastic public reaction convinced Chrysler management to take a bold next step. In February of 1962, just before the Chicago Auto Show, the company announced that it would build a limited fleet of 50 turbine cars and lend them to regular drivers for real-world testing. Something which it would do again in future in the GM EV1, which we will definitely cover on this channel. I technically have covered it on this channel, but on the old one where the mic sounds like it's been shoved up my... The unprecedented public trial was slated for 1963 release. And oh boy, did Chrysler decide to go all in on this, because they decided to team up with a design house called Carrozzeria Ghia to craft the new turbine car bodies. Renowned stylist Elwood Engel, recently hired from Ford, who had helped to design the Thunderbird, penned a sleek two-door hardtop coupe shape. The turbine car featured refined, semi-formal lines, long hood, crisp roofline, often painted in a signature metallic turbine bronze color. In fact, all 50 of the user program cars wore this bronze paint, giving them a rich root beer hue that symbolized the exotic power source. Ghia hand-built 55 bodies, 5 prototypes and 50 test cars in Turin in Italy, and then shipped them to Detroit, where Chrysler installed the turbine engines and torque flight automatic transmission. Each car was essentially coach-built with plush interiors, power steering and brakes, and is estimated to have cost as much as $50,000 per vehicle, which again doesn't sound like a lot, but that's over $500,000 in today's money per car just to produce, not to sell. Chrysler never disclosed the cost per turbine engine, but the use of exotic metals, precise machining, and investment casting made them extremely expensive. This was still very much a research program, definitely not a money-making venture. Under the hood was Chrysler's 4th generation turbo engine, the A831, which weighed only 410 pounds, remarkably light for a drivetrain, and given it didn't need radiators or cooling systems, the engine bay was remarkably clean. The A831 used twin regenerators, one on each side of the turbine, to recuperate heat, boosting efficiency and trimming 40 pounds from the previous design. It produced 130 brake horsepower with a massive 425 pound-feet of torque available at stall, and it idled at an astonishing 18,000 to 22,000 RPM, redlining at 60,000 RPM. In practice, the turbine car accelerated from 0 to 60 in a breezy 12 seconds. So not a muscle car by any means, but perfectly adequate for a luxury car of the era. One of the turbine car's party tricks was its ability to run on practically any flammable liquid. The engine was designed to burn diesel, kerosene, unleaded gasoline, or jet fuel routinely. But Chrysler went further in publicity stunts. They demonstrated it running on peanut oil, furnace oil, and even perfume and tequila. Mexican President Adolfo López Mateos famously filled a turbine car's tank with tequila to prove the point, though, as you can imagine, that would be more expensive than regular gasoline anyway. The only fuel strictly off limits was leaded gasoline, which left damaging deposits in the turbine, which was a big limitation, given that at the time most gasoline was still leaded. Still, this fuel flexibility was a major selling point. A car that could theoretically run during an oil crisis by burning home heating oil or farm oils decades before flex fuel became a buzzword. The first 5 prototype turbine cars were completed in 1962 for internal testing, each in a slightly different trim. Engineers quickly found some quirks. Acceleration off the line was a bit sluggish, partly due to the heavy hand-built body and the nature of the turbine. There was also the odd vibration at certain speeds, eventually traced not to the engine, but to the tires. The turbine was so smooth that normal tire imbalances, usually masked by engine vibration, became noticeable, something that they've noted a lot in electric cars now that are very, very quiet. And these issues were minor and addressed as Chrysler prepared to put the cars into the public hands. In October of 1963, an unprecedented plan was rolled out by Chrysler. 50 of the turbine cars were loaned free of charge to ordinary drivers around the United States. Over the next 2 years, 203 men and women in 133 cities got to act as turbine car owners for about 3 months each. Chrysler only asked that they log their experiences and give detailed feedback. Participants ranged in age from 21 to 70, and while 60% were already Chrysler owners, many others were just curious members of the public. This was one of the largest real-world tests of an experimental drivetrain ever conducted. A media-savvy Chrysler built massive buzz and gathered data at the same time. Over 1 million miles were accumulated by these turbine cars in the program, and impressively, Chrysler's support team managed to cut the car's downtime for maintenance from 4% at the start of the program to only 1% by the end. Still, users encountered challenges. The turbines had an elaborate 8-step starting procedure involving engaging a starter, waiting for the turbine to spin up, and then introducing fuel, and some drivers found this confusing. And even a few damaged the engine by not following it correctly. At high altitudes, the air-thin conditions sometimes cause starter malfunctions, making the cars hard to fire up in places such as Denver, for example. And acceleration, while acceptable, was not as brisk as a big V8. Many drivers reported a turbine car still felt slow off the line, and passing required planning. And while turbines ran smoother than any piston engines with basically no vibration at all, it had a unique sound, a high-pitched jet whine combined with a whoosh, which drew mixed reviews. The distinctive turbine sound was loved by some, but loathed by others. The Chrysler found about 60% of users enjoyed the jet-like noise. It made them feel like they were piloting a spaceship, whereas about 20% disliked it, preferring a conventional rumble, and the other 20% frankly couldn't give a shit because they were driving a free car. Beyond the sound, users raved about the lack of vibration and the minimal maintenance. No oil changes needed, no radiators to top off. The turbine car started reliably in winter cold and summer heat alike, which was a boon in an era where carbureted engines could be temperamental, to say the least. If you've ever owned a carbureted engine like I have, you'll know this is the case. On the downside, fuel economy remained mediocre, roughly 11 to 13 miles per gallon in mixed driving, not much better than a big Chrysler V8, and worse when drivers indulged in the turbine's high-speed capability. Fuel was cheap in the 1960s, but the looming concern was whether turbines could match the efficiency of piston engines. Overall, the user program proved the turbine concept could work in everyday life, but highlighted a lot of areas where Chrysler would need to improve in order to make it a competitive and alluring purchase for the everyday buyer who wasn't caught up in the exotic nature of this turbine field. The turbine car, though, did generate a ton of publicity. One car went on a world tour to wow international audiences. The program was covered in magazines and on TV, and it embodied the mid-1960s optimism that American technology was on the brink of something new. But by 1966, the test program had wrapped up, and now Chrysler faced a daunting decision. The public test had given invaluable data, but also made clear that further development was needed before turbine cars could go to the market. In April of 1966, the executives announced that regardless of the positive feedback, the 50 turbine cars would be withdrawn from service. Production for sale was not on the cards yet. The cars had served their research purpose, and Chrysler wasn't prepared to maintain them indefinitely. As a result, all 50 turbine cars were recalled by Chrysler, similar to what would happen decades later for the GM EV1, although in that case, every single one basically of the GM EV1 people wanted to purchase them. Wasn't really the case here. People just gave the cars back. In a move that would later be criticized as tragic by car lovers, Chrysler decided to destroy most of the turbine cars. Again, very, very strange thing to do. Why would you destroy them all instead of keeping all of them in museums and so on? In 1967, 46 of the 55 examples were sent to the scrapyard and burned or crushed. Only 9 were spared, plus the original prototype chassis. Chrysler kept 2 for itself and the rest were donated to museums. A popular myth held that tax or import tariffs on the Italian-built bodies forced Chrysler to scrap the cars to avoid fees. However, historians like Steve Lado basically have said that this was completely debunked. More likely, Chrysler's PR and legal departments insisted on destruction. They feared liability or bad press if someone ever owned a privately owned turbine car that broke down with no parts or support, or worse, someone swapped a V8 into a turbine car and ruined its mystique. Our main objective is research, one Chrysler executive told Look magazine, and we did not want the turbines ending up on used car lots. In other words, once the experiment was over, Chrysler treated these cars like any other prototype, disposable. The decision to pause turbine car development wasn't just about user feedback. There were bigger obstacles on the horizon. As the 1960s progressed, the US government introduced emissions regulations, which turbine engines would really struggle to meet. The turbines ran hot and typically produced high NOx emissions. Getting them clean enough for new standards would require expensive reinvention. Even as Chrysler continued to develop fifth and sixth generation turbine engines into the early 1970s, these engines remained finicky in the eyes of accountants and regulators. Chrysler's turbine dream officially died, though, in 1979, and circumstances played a major role. That year, Chrysler faced financial collapse and sought a federal bailout. As a condition of the government's Loan Guarantee Act of 1979, Chrysler had to agree to end its turbine program and focus on its core businesses, which is fair enough. It was the final nail in the coffin. The 7th generation turbine engine being developed was shelved, but from 1940's inception to its 1979 cancellation, the gas turbine-powered passenger car had been an extraordinary 30-year journey. Of the few turbine cars that escaped the crusher, most live in museums where they are still crowd magnets. A handful remain operational. Museums occasionally run their turbine cars for special events, and Jay Leno famously maintains his in-driving condition. Though the program ended, Chrysler didn't completely abandon turbine cars immediately. Into the 1970s, they experimented with improved engines, aided by a $6.4 million contract from the EPA to develop cleaner turbines, and they even installed a turbine engine on a 1977 Dodge Aspen Compact as a testbed, but none of these saw mass production. The lessons learned did influence other fields, notably Chrysler's turbine know-how transferred to its Chrysler Defense Division, and in the late 1970s, Chrysler was contracted to design the M1 Abrams main battle tank for the US Army. They chose a 1,500 horsepower gas turbine engine, the Avco Lyoming AGT 1500, to power it. The Abrams tank entered service in 1980, making America's premier battle tank, powered by this jet-age futuristic engine that unfortunately would never make it into a production car. So unfortunately, the turbine car never became a thing of the future and was instead relegated to the past. All of the remaining cars that escaped the crusher living in museums, thankfully, where most of them are kept running by brilliant museum owners, and one of which kept fully in driving condition to this day by Jay Leno, who still apparently potters around in it and shows it off on Jay Leno's garage. And given the way the world's gone, it's very unlikely that it'll ever be more than that. But it's always brilliant to look back at some of these spectacular cars of the future, now relegated to the past. This has been Storytime. I've been Jason Hassett. Thank you for watching Car Nerd. Don't forget to subscribe.